She was 8 months pregnant when her husband's mistress pushed her from a moving car at 70 miles per hour. Her billionaire husband watched in the rearview mirror. He did not stop. He did not scream. He laughed. She gave birth alone on that highway, bleeding, broken, left for dead. But here is what Preston Ashford did not know. He did not kill his wife. He created his worst nightmare. What happens next will leave you breathless. A mother's revenge, a billionaire's downfall, and a twist so devastating, you will not see it coming. Stay until the end. Trust me. And if this story shocks you, hit subscribe. You do not want to miss what comes next. The leather seat was cold against Meredith Cole's back. 8 months pregnant, she had made a terrible mistake. She had gotten in the car, not with her husband, with the woman he had been sleeping with for the past 11 months. And now, at 70 miles per hour on Interstate 77, Dominique Lawson's perfectly manicured hands were reaching toward her shoulders. The passenger door was hanging open, and Preston Ashford III was watching everything unfold in the rearview mirror. He was smiling. Meredith had spent 6 years as a forensic accountant before she married Preston. She knew how to read people, how to spot inconsistencies, how to recognize when numbers did not add up. But she had missed every red flag in her own marriage. The late nights that stretched into early mornings, the business trips that never quite checked out, the way Preston's phone was always face down, always on silent, always just out of her reach. She had found the evidence 3 weeks ago. Not suspicion, proof. Bank transfers to Dominique totaling over $2 million. Text messages, planning trips to Cabo, Paris, the Maldives, dates that corresponded exactly with Preston's supposed investor meetings, and one text that had made her blood run cold. After the baby comes, we move forward. She will not be an issue. Meredith had not confronted Preston. She was smarter than that. Instead, she had copied everything. Financial records, emails, the offshore accounts she discovered hidden in shell companies across 3 Caribbean nations. She had built a case the way she had been trained to build cases, methodically and thoroughly. Then she had made her move. She had called Dominique directly, told her she had evidence that could destroy Preston's company and send them both to prison for securities fraud, demanded a meeting, alone when Dominique had agreed. Too quickly. Meredith realized now. Far too quickly. The black Range Rover had picked her up outside her doctor's office in Charlotte. Dominique had been driving. She had said they needed privacy, suggested they talk while driving, away from anyone who might overhear. Meredith had gotten in because she was confident, because she had the upper hand, because she had underestimated how far they were willing to go. Now the wind screamed through the open door, and Meredith understood everything. Where is Preston? She had asked 15 minutes into the drive. Dominique had smiled. Right behind us. Meredith had turned, seen the second Range Rover following, seen Preston's face through the windshield. That was when Dominique had pulled onto the shoulder, stopped the car, and Preston had gotten out of his vehicle and climbed into the driver's seat of theirs. "Hello, sweetheart," he had said. "We need to talk about those files you copied." Now the door was open. The highway was a gray blur below, and Dominique's hands were on her shoulders. Meredith grabbed the headrest, twisted, tried to push back. Her pregnant belly made movement impossible. She was trapped, cornered, helpless. "Do it now," Preston said. His voice was calm, almost bored, like he was ordering coffee. Meredith clawed at Dominique's arm, felt her nails tear through skin, saw blood well up in 3 parallel lines. Dominique hissed in pain but did not stop. She shoved harder. Meredith felt her grip on the headrest slipping. "Preston," she screamed. "Preston, please." The baby. He looked at her in the rearview mirror. Those blue eyes she had loved, that had promised her forever, that had seemed so warm on their wedding day. They were empty now, cold, the eyes of a stranger. "The baby will be fine," he said. "You are the problem. Meredith, you should have taken the settlement I offered." She had not been offered any settlement. He was lying, already constructing his narrative, already planning what he would tell the police. Dominique shoved one final time. Meredith's fingers scraped metal, missed, found nothing but air. The world tilted. She saw sky, asphalt, the blur of trees. She twisted mid-fall, instinct taking over, arms wrapping around her belly to protect the life inside her. She hit the ground shoulder first. Pain exploded through her body. She rolled, gravel tearing through her maternity dress, through her skin, leaving fire in its wake. The world spun. She could not breathe, could not think, could only feel the impact repeating through her bones. When she stopped rolling, she was on her back, staring at the October sky, blue and perfect. A beautiful day to die. The Range Rover's brake lights glowed red. For 3 seconds, maybe 4. Meredith thought they were coming back, coming to finish it. Or maybe Preston had changed his mind. Maybe he realized what he had done. The lights went dark. The engine roared. Both vehicles accelerated away, disappeared around the curve. And then she heard it. Laughter. Preston's laugh and Dominique's laugh carried on the wind, both of them laughing as they left her bleeding on the highway. Meredith lay still, assessed. Her left arm was wrong, bent at an angle that made her stomach lurch. Road rash burned across her shoulder, her hip, her legs. Blood seeped from a dozen wounds. Then the pain hit. Not the injuries. Something deeper. A contraction that gripped her entire body and squeezed. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no. Not now. Please, not now." The baby was 5 weeks early. Too early. Meredith had a birth plan, a hospital bag packed, a nursery painted pale yellow with white trim. She was supposed to have 5 more weeks. Another contraction. Stronger. Closer. Meredith did not wait for rescue. She rolled onto her good side, pushed herself up with her right arm, screamed through the pain. She crawled toward the road, toward the rumble of approaching vehicles. A semi-truck roared past, horn blaring, driver not stopping or not seeing. She kept crawling, reached the white line marking the shoulder, waved her good arm. Another car passed, then another. Finally, a blue pickup truck slowed, pulled over. An elderly man climbed out, face going pale when he saw her. "Oh, my Lord," he said. "Oh, my Lord, what happened?" Meredith grabbed his arm, pulled him close, spoke through gritted teeth. "Call 911. Tell them attempted murder. The man who did this is Preston Ashford, ASHFORD, CEO of Ashford Dynamics. Black Range Rover. License plate Alpha, Charlie 7429. Write it down. Write it down now." The man fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. But he wrote down the plate number. He made the call, and Meredith lay back on the gravel, one hand on her belly, and waited for help to come. She was not going to die on this highway. She was going to survive. She was going to protect her baby. And then she was going to destroy Preston Ashford. The paramedic's name was Rachel Simmons. She was in her 40s, short gray hair, no-nonsense attitude. She took one look at Meredith and started barking orders. "We are not going to make it to the hospital." She told her partner, "Set up here, now." Meredith grabbed Rachel's arm before she could move away. "I need to give a statement. Right now, before anyone can say I was confused. Ma'am, you are in labor. You need to focus on breathing." "I am breathing fine." Meredith's voice was sharp, controlled. Her forensic accountant brain was already working, already building the case. His name is Preston Ashford III, CEO of Ashford Dynamics. His mistress, Dominique Lawson, pushed me from the vehicle while it was moving at approximately 70 miles per hour. He was driving. They planned this together. I have evidence of conspiracy on a flash drive hidden in my home office. Rachel stared at her for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone, hit record. "Say that again," she said. "All of it. From the beginning." Meredith told her everything. Names, dates, the text message, the copied files. She spoke between contractions, her voice steady even as her body was tearing itself apart. Rachel recorded every word. "I believe you," Rachel said when Meredith finished. "For what it is worth. Your injuries match your story exactly. No one falls out of a vehicle like this. You were pushed." The contractions were coming faster now, 2 minutes apart, then 90 seconds. Rachel's partner had set up a sterile field on the gravel, privacy screens blocking the view from passing traffic. It was not ideal. It was not safe. But the baby was coming regardless. The sky was turning gold, the sun sinking toward the horizon. Magic hour, the most beautiful time of day. Meredith would remember that later. How peaceful the sky looked while her world was falling apart. "I see the head," Rachel said. Next contraction, push as hard as you can. Meredith pushed, screamed, felt her body tear in ways she had not known were possible. The pain was primal, overwhelming, but underneath it was something else. Determination, fury, a mother's absolute refusal to let her child die. One more, Rachel said. One more big push. Meredith pushed again, felt something release, heard the most beautiful sound she had ever heard in her life. Crying. Her baby was crying. It is a girl, Rachel said, her voice thick with emotion. You have a beautiful baby girl. They placed the baby on Meredith's chest. Warm, solid, real, covered in blood and vernix. Tiny fists clenched, lungs screaming at the world. 5 pounds, 2 ounces, small but fierce. Hi, Meredith whispered. Hi, baby. I am your mama. The baby's eyes opened. Dark blue, unfocused, but looking, seeing, meeting her mother for the first time on the shoulder of Interstate 77, surrounded by strangers and traffic and the smell of diesel fuel. What is her name? Rachel asked. Meredith thought of the name she and Preston had chosen. Charlotte, his grandmother's name, his family's legacy. No, Vivian, Meredith said. Vivian Rose Cole, not Ashford, Cole. Her maiden name, her family, her legacy. The baby blinked, seemed to consider this, then yawned and snuggled closer to her mother's chest. Meredith held her, breathed her in, felt something shift inside herself. Not just the physical aftermath of birth, something deeper, a transformation. She had been Meredith Ashford for 4 years, Preston's wife, a supporting character in his story, decorative, yippee useful, easily replaced. She was Meredith Cole now, Vivian's mother, a protagonist in her own story, and God help anyone who tried to take her daughter away. The ambulance ride was a blur of lights and sirens and medical equipment. Vivian was checked, monitored, pronounced healthy despite being 5 weeks premature. A fighter. The EMT said, she is a fighter. At Charlotte Regional's Medical Center, they were rushed into the emergency room. A doctor appeared. Older man, gray hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His name tag said Dr. Nathan Holt. Mrs. Ashford. He began. Cole. Meredith corrected. My name is Meredith Cole. He did not argue. Mrs. Cole, I need to examine you. Check for internal injuries. You have been through significant trauma. She let him work. Watched as he documented everything. The road rash, the bruising, the way her injuries formed a pattern consistent with being pushed from a moving vehicle. These are not self-inflicted wounds. Holt said slowly, carefully, this was not an accident. The angle of impact, the distribution of injuries. This is consistent with someone being forcibly ejected from a vehicle in motion. Can you testify to that? Meredith asked. He met her eyes. Already planning on it. From her hospital bed, Meredith made 2 phone calls. The first was to her old colleague at the FBI field office in Charlotte. James, she said, I need you to freeze my financial records before Preston can touch them. Joint accounts, investment portfolios, everything. Tonight, Meredith, what is going on? Preston tried to kill me. I am going to need evidence, and I cannot let him destroy it. The second call was to the only person she truly trusted, her college roommate, her best friend, the woman who had stood beside her at her wedding and whispered, are you sure about this guy? Willa, Meredith said when she answered, I need help. It is 2 a.m. I know. Preston tried to kill me. I gave birth on a highway, and I need a lawyer who is not afraid to fight dirty. Silence. Then the sound of sheets rustling. Someone getting out of bed. I am on my way, Willa said. Do not talk to anyone else until I get there. Meredith hung up, looked down at Vivian sleeping in the hospital bassinet. So small, so vulnerable, so completely dependent on her mother to keep her safe. I am going to protect you, Meredith whispered. Whatever it takes. I am going to protect you. Preston arrived at 9:15 the next morning. He came with flowers, a look of devastated concern on his handsome face, and 3 lawyers in expensive suits. He also brought hospital administrator Richard Sullivan, who owed his position to a generous donation from Ashford Dynamics. Meredith, Preston said, his voice breaking with emotion. Thank God you are all right. I have been so worried. He moved toward her bed, arms open for an embrace. Meredith saw exactly what he was doing. The security cameras in the corners of the room, the performance for witnesses, the concerned husband narrative being constructed in real time. "Do not touch me," she said. Preston's face flickered, the mask slipping for just a second. Then it was back, sorrowful and confused. "Sweetheart, I do not understand. The hospital called me, told me you had an accident. I came as fast as I could. It was not an accident. You know exactly what happened." The lawyers exchanged glances. One of them, a woman with silver hair and cold eyes, stepped forward. "Mrs. Ashford, given the trauma you have experienced, it might be best not to make any statements until you have rested." "My name is Cole," Meredith said, "and I will make whatever statements I want. Your client tried to murder me." Preston's hand went to his chest, wounded, bewildered. The performance was flawless. 4 years of marriage, and she had never seen him act this well, or maybe she had just never noticed. The door opened. Detective Marcus Webb entered, badge on his belt, notebook in hand. He was in his 50s, weathered face, skeptical eyes that had seen too many wealthy people walk away from consequences. "Mrs. Ashford," he said. "Cole." He made a note. "Mrs. Cole, I need to ask you some questions about what happened yesterday." "Detective?" Preston's lawyer interrupted. "My client is also eager to assist in this investigation. He has evidence that will help clarify what occurred." Webb looked at Preston, at the lawyers, at the hospital administrator hovering near the door. His expression did not change, but Meredith saw something shift behind his eyes. Wariness. He had dealt with the people like this before. "Let us hear it," Webb said. Preston pulled out his phone, handed it to his lawyer, who connected it to the room's television screen. Security footage appeared. Ashford Dynamics headquarters. A timestamp showing 3:45 in the afternoon. Preston walking through the lobby, getting into an elevator. "As you can see," the lawyer said, "Mr. Ashford was at his office during the time of the alleged incident." More footage. Preston in a conference room. Preston shaking hands with men in suits. Preston at his desk, reviewing documents. All timestamped between 3 and 9 in the evening. "Keycard logs," the lawyer continued, handing Webb a folder. 6 witness statements from employees who saw Mr. Ashford during the relevant time period. He was nowhere near Interstate 77. Webb reviewed the documents, his face unreadable. "Mrs. Cole," he said finally, "you claim your husband was driving the vehicle that you fell from." "I did not fall. I was pushed by his mistress, Dominica Lawson. Preston was driving, and yet we have security footage placing him elsewhere. The footage is fake. He owns the building. He controls the security system. That is quite an accusation. It is the truth." Webb looked between them. Preston the picture of wounded concern. Meredith battered and desperate. She knew how this looked. She knew what he was thinking. "Mrs. Cole, you have been through significant trauma. Head injuries can cause confusion, false memories. I do not have a head injury. I know what happened." "Perhaps," one of the lawyers said smoothly, "a psychiatric evaluation would help clarify things. Given the stress of the birth, the accident, the obvious confusion about events." Preston nodded gravely. "I am just worried about her, about our daughter. Meredith has been struggling lately. Paranoia, delusions. I suggested therapy months ago. I am not paranoid. She went through my phone." Preston continued, his voice sad. "Accused me of affairs that never happened. Became convinced I was plotting against her. I thought it was pregnancy hormones. But now I wonder if it is something more serious. Every word was calculated. Every sentence designed to make her sound unstable. And it was working." She could see it in Webb's face, the doubt creeping in. "I want her evaluated," Preston said, "for her safety and for our daughter's safety, until we know she is mentally stable. I do not think she should be alone with the baby. No." Meredith tried to get out of bed, agony shooting through her injured body. "No, you cannot take her." The hospital administrator stepped forward. "Given the circumstances, I think a temporary psychiatric evaluation is appropriate, for everyone's protection." A nurse appeared in the doorway, 2 more behind her. They moved toward Vivian's bassinet. Meredith screamed, fought, but her body was broken, her strength gone. She watched helplessly as they carried her daughter out of the room, Vivian's cries echoing down the hallway. Preston leaned close, so close only she could hear. "I told you," he whispered. "I always win." Then he straightened, turned to Detective Webb with a sorrowful expression, and said, "I just want what is best for my family." He left with his lawyers, with the administrator, with everyone who mattered. Meredith was alone in the hospital room, labeled hysterical, her evidence dismissed, her daughter taken. She did not cry. She did not break. She pulled out the notepad the nurse had given her and began to write. Names, dates, account numbers, everything she remembered, everything she had copied, everything Preston thought he had destroyed. They thought she was crazy. They would underestimate her. Good. Willa Brennan looked like she had not slept in days. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her blazer wrinkled, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She carried a leather briefcase and a large cup of coffee that she immediately handed to Meredith. "You look terrible, Willa said. "I gave birth on a highway and then watched my husband gaslight an entire hospital." "How are you?" Willa sat in the chair beside the bed, pulled out a legal pad. "Fair point. Tell me everything." Meredith told her. The files she had copied, the text messages, the confrontation with Dominique, the push, the security footage that Preston had used to construct his alibi. The psychiatric evaluation that was scheduled for this afternoon. Willa listened without interrupting, making notes, her expression growing darker with each detail. "He planned this," Willa said when Meredith finished. "Every piece of it. The affair, the setup, the push, the alibi. He has been building this case for months. I know. The question is why. Divorce would have been simpler. With a prenup like yours, he could have walked away clean." Meredith had been thinking about this all night. The answer was obvious once she stopped trying to understand Preston as a normal human being. "Control," she said. "Divorce means I have a voice. I could talk to journalists, write a book, tell people what he is really like. But if I am dead or committed to a psychiatric facility, I am silenced permanently. And he keeps the baby, the heir, the legacy." "Exactly." Willa tapped her pen against the legal pad. "What about the evidence you copied? The flash drive? Hidden in my office at home, behind a loose electrical outlet cover. Can we get to it?" "Not without alerting Preston. He probably has the house under surveillance. Then we need other evidence. What about the truck driver who found you? Henry Dalton, according to the police report. He saw everything. He wrote down the license plate." Willa was already dialing. She spoke to someone, asked questions, made notes. When she hung up, her expression was complicated. Detective Webb interviewed him yesterday. "The truck driver's story has changed." "Changed how?" "He says you were confused, disoriented, that you said a lot of things that did not make sense. He is not sure you were pushed. Maybe you jumped. Maybe the door malfunctioned. He does not remember the license plate anymore." Meredith closed her eyes. Preston got to him, or his lawyers did. Same result. "What about the dash cam?" "The truck had a dash cam." "I saw it." Willa's eyes lit up. She made another call. This one took longer. Involved threats about subpoenas and obstruction of justice. When she hung up, she was almost smiling. "The dash cam footage exists. Webb has it. He is reviewing it this afternoon. That footage will show everything. The Range Rover, the push, Preston driving. For 2 hours. Meredith let herself hope. She passed the psychiatric evaluation, the doctor finding her lucid and coherent despite the trauma. She was not crazy. The evidence would prove it. Then Detective Webb called. "The footage is corrupted," he said. "Technical analysis shows it was remotely accessed and degraded overnight. We can see a dark vehicle, a figure falling, but nothing identifiable. No license plate, no faces. That is impossible. Someone tampered with it. We are investigating, but without an identifiable suspect, there is nothing we can do. The suspect is Preston Ashford. He has a tech team. He has the resources." "Mrs. Cole, I understand your frustration, but we cannot accuse someone of evidence tampering without proof." He hung up. Meredith stared at the phone in her hand. "The footage was our best chance," Willa said quietly. "Without it, We have your word against his, and he has money, lawyers, connections, and manufactured alibis, and a hospital administration in his pocket, and probably half the police department. Meredith wanted to scream, wanted to throw the phone against the wall, wanted to burn down everything Preston had built. Instead, she took a breath, steadied herself. He went after the footage, she said. That means he is scared. Scared people make mistakes. What do you suggest? We find other witnesses, other victims. Men like Preston do not start with attempted murder. They build up to it. There is a pattern. Other women, other incidents. How do we find them? Your sister, Meredith said. Julia, she is an investigative journalist. Right. Willa nodded slowly. She has sources, access. She could dig in places lawyers and police cannot. Call her. Tell her everything. And tell her to start with Dominique Lawson. Where did she come from? Who did she work for before Ashford Dynamics? And who else has Preston made disappear? No. Chapter 4. Word count 847 words. Running total 100 words. Status under target. Need to expand. Adding content. So Willa made the call while Meredith watched, her mind racing through possibilities. Julia Brennan was younger than Willa, hungrier, the kind of journalist who lived for stories that powerful people wanted buried. I need you to find everything on Preston Ashford, Willa said into the phone. Corporate records, personal history, former employees, specifically any women who left his companies under unusual circumstances. Settlements, non-disclosure agreements, anything that smells wrong. She listened, made notes, nodded at things Meredith could not hear. Yes, I know who he is. Yes, I know he is dangerous. That is why we need you. When she hung up, Willa's expression was grim but determined. Julia is on it. She is starting tonight. How long will it take? Days, maybe weeks. Ashford has buried things deep. We do not have weeks. There is a custody hearing in 8 days. Then we need to move faster. What else do you have? Anything Preston does not know about, Meredith thought. The files she had copied were comprehensive but hidden. The flash drive was inaccessible. The dash cam footage was destroyed. What did she have that Preston had not anticipated? The scratch, she said suddenly. When Dominique pushed me, I clawed her arm, drew blood. There should be DNA under my fingernails. Willa was already pulling out her phone. We need to get your nail scrapings tested immediately, before they degrade, before anyone has a chance to lose them. She made calls, demanded evidence be preserved, threatened lawsuits if proper chain of custody was not maintained. Meredith watched her work and felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope, fragile and tentative. But there, the victim, they had DNA evidence. They had an investigative journalist digging into Preston's past. They had Meredith's testimony, which was not nothing. Despite what Preston wanted everyone to believe, it was not much. But it was a start. The family courthouse in Charlotte was a limestone building from the 1920s, all marble floors and high ceilings and portraits of judges long dead. It was designed to impress, to intimidate, to make regular people feel small. Meredith walked through the doors with Willa at her side. Her injuries were still visible, the road rash scabbing on her arms, the bruises yellowing on her face. She had not tried to hide them. Let the judge see what Preston had done. Preston was already there, surrounded by his legal team. 4 attorneys, 2 paralegals, a stack of binders thick enough to crush someone. He wore a navy suit, perfectly tailored, his expression one of weary concern. The devoted father, worried about his unstable wife. His mother Eleanor was there too, seated behind him, silver hair, elegant posture, pearl earrings that probably cost more than Meredith's childhood home. She did not meet Meredith's eyes. Judge Patricia Thornton presided. She was in her 60s, sharp-featured, with a reputation for favoring fathers in custody disputes. That reputation had made Preston's lawyers specifically request her. Meredith's heart sank. The hearing began with Preston's lead attorney, a man named Richard Sullivan, who had argued before the Supreme Court twice and won both times. He presented their case with devastating efficiency. Your Honor, Mr. Ashford is here seeking temporary custody of his newborn daughter, Vivian. He has significant concerns about the mother's mental stability and the child's safety. He presented the psychiatric evaluation notes from the hospital, Meredith's anxiety during pregnancy, her accusations against Preston, Her insistence that her husband, a respected businessman with an airtight alibi, had tried to murder her. The treating physicians noted paranoid ideation. Sullivan said, Mrs. Cole has exhibited symptoms consistent with a psychotic break, likely exacerbated by the trauma of her accident. It was not an accident, Meredith said. Judge Thornton looked at her over her glasses. You will have your turn to speak. Mrs. Cole. Preston took the stand. He was magnificent in his deception, voice cracking at precisely the right moments, eyes glistening with unshed tears. He described Meredith's behavior over the past months, the accusations, the paranoia, the way she had gone through his phone, convinced he was having affairs that never happened. I suggested therapy. He said, she went to 3 sessions, then stopped. Said the therapist was conspiring with me against her. I thought it was pregnancy hormones, but looking back, I should have pushed harder, should have gotten her more help. Maybe this would not have happened. And where were you on the afternoon of October 14th? Sullivan asked. At my office, investor meetings all day. I have security footage, key card logs, 6 witnesses who saw me there. Is there any possibility you were on Interstate 77 that afternoon? None whatsoever. Preston's voice was firm, his gaze steady. I love my wife. I would never hurt her. The idea that I would throw her from a moving car is insane. The word hung in the air. Insane, not the accusation. Her. Then it was Meredith's turn. She presented her evidence. The financial records showing payments to Dominique, the text message about moving forward after the baby, the DNA evidence from her nail scrapings. Sullivan destroyed each piece. The financial records were obtained without authorization. Inadmissible. The text message was clearly referring to a problematic vendor, as context from surrounding messages shows, and the DNA evidence proves only that Mrs. Cole scratched someone, not who or under what circumstances. Perhaps she scratched a nurse during her psychotic episode at the hospital. I was not having a psychotic episode, Meredith said, yet you claim your husband, a man with a documented alibi and no history of violence, personally drove you to a highway and had his assistant push you from a moving vehicle. Does that not strike you as delusional? It is the truth, your truth. Mrs. Cole, not reality. Judge Thornton listened to both sides, reviewed the evidence, made notes. Her face gave nothing away. When the presentations were complete, she removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. This is difficult, she said. I have 2 conflicting narratives and inconclusive evidence. She looked at Meredith with something that might have been sympathy. Mrs. Cole, I am not unsympathetic to your situation. You clearly experienced a trauma, but I cannot ignore the medical evaluations, the documented alibi, the lack of corroborating evidence for your claims. Until these matters are resolved, I must consider the child's safety first, she ruled. Temporary custody to Preston Ashford. Meredith to have supervised visitation, 2 hours 3 times per week. The child to remain with Preston's mother, Eleanor, until further evaluation. No, Meredith said, no, please. She is my daughter. My decision is final. We will revisit in 30 days. The gavel came down. Final. Irrevocable. Meredith watched as Eleanor Ashford stood, as a social worker brought Vivian out from wherever they had been keeping her during the hearing. Her daughter was crying, reaching for someone, anyone. Eleanor took her with practiced ease. Preston passed Meredith on his way out. He leaned close. I told you, he whispered. I always win. Meredith's legs gave out. She fell, right there in the courtroom, knees hitting the cold marble floor. Willa caught her, held her, tried to lift her up, but Meredith could not move, could only watch as they carried her daughter away. Then she saw something. Eleanor's face turned back toward her for just a moment. Not triumphant, not smug, terrified. Eleanor knew. She had seen this before, and she was afraid. Meredith filed that look away. A crack in the wall, a potential ally. But right now, all she felt was empty. The next 10 days were the worst of Meredith's life. She was staying at her childhood home in Gastonia, a modest 2-bedroom ranch that her parents had left her when they died. The wallpaper was peeling. The roof leaked in 3 places, and the kitchen smelled faintly of mildew. But it was hers. The only thing Preston could not touch. Supervised visits with Vivian were torture. 2 hours, 3 times a week, with a court-appointed social worker watching every move. The visits happened at Eleanor's mansion in Myers Park, a sprawling estate that made Meredith's childhood home look like a garden shed. Vivian was changing, growing, learning to focus her eyes, to track movement, to recognize faces, but she did not recognize Meredith anymore. She cried when Meredith held her, squirmed to get away, reached for the nanny who had been caring for her. Every visit ended the same way. Meredith handing back her daughter, driving home alone, sitting in the dark, trying not to fall apart. Then Detective Webb called. "We found Dominique Lawson," he said. Meredith sat up straight. "Where?" "Motel outside Asheville. She has been paying Cata using a fake name, but she slipped up, used a credit card for room service. We have her." "What is she saying?" "She wants to talk, but she is scared. Says Preston visited her, threatened her. She has bruises on her arms. She is willing to flip if we can guarantee immunity and protection." Meredith's heart hammered. This was it. Dominique was the key. She was there. She knew everything. "When can I see her?" "You cannot. Not yet. We need to do this by the book. But I wanted you to know we might actually get him. For 2 days. Meredith allowed herself to hope. She and Willa prepared for the new hearing that would happen once Dominique testified. They outlined the case, the witnesses they would call, the evidence they would present. Then Webb called again. His voice was different, flat, empty. "Dominique Lawson is dead," he said. "Found in her motel room this morning. Overdose. We are ruling it a suicide." "Oh, no." Meredith's voice cracked. "No, that is not possible. There was a note, typed. Not handwritten, but printed and signed. It said she could not live with what she did, that she was sorry for hurting you, that Preston was innocent and she acted alone. That is a lie, though Preston had her killed. There is no evidence of that. The timing is evidence. The note absolves him. She was about to testify." "I know how it looks," Webb said. "Believe me, I know. But without proof, my hands are tied." He hung up. Meredith stared at the phone. Willa was watching her, face pale. "Dominique is dead," Meredith said. "Suicide? Supposedly. Oh, God. Preston killed her, or had her killed, and now I look even crazier. My one witness conveniently dies and leaves a note saying Preston is innocent. It is too perfect." Willa did not argue. She knew Meredith was right. "What do we do now?" "I do not know," Meredith admitted. "I genuinely do not know." But even in her despair, her forensic accountant brain was working. Something about the suicide did not add up. The note was typed, she said slowly, not handwritten. So Dominique was meticulous, organized. If she was going to leave a suicide note, she would have written it by hand, made it personal. "You think someone else wrote it?" "I think someone created it after she was already dead." "Can you prove that?" "Maybe. If we can get the autopsy report, the toxicology results, any inconsistencies." Willa nodded, already pulling out her phone to make calls. Meredith looked out the window at the darkening sky. Preston had won again, but he had also made a mistake. Somewhere in the details of Dominique's death, there would be evidence of what really happened. She just had to find it. Chapter 6. Word count 706 words. Running total 6,089 words. Status under target. Need to expand. Time. The autopsy report arrived 3 days later. Willa had called in every favor she had to get it expedited, and now they sat in Meredith's cramped kitchen, poring over the medical examiner's findings. Cause of death, acute drug intoxication. Willa read aloud, heroin and fentanyl combination. Injection site on the right inner arm. The right arm. Meredith repeated. She grabbed her phone, searched through the photos she had taken during her brief interactions with Dominique, found one from a company dinner. Dominique holding a champagne glass. "Look," Meredith said, showing Willa the screen. "She is holding the glass in her left hand. The watch is on her right wrist." So she was left-handed. A left-handed person injecting themselves would use their dominant hand, which means the injection would be on the right arm, not the left. But wait, she reread the report. This says the injection site was on the right inner arm. That means someone else injected her. Someone right-handed. Willa stared at her. That is not enough for a murder charge. No, but it is enough for reasonable doubt, enough to reopen the investigation, unless Preston has already gotten to the medical examiner. Meredith thought about that, thought about how far Preston's influence reached, how many people he had bought or blackmailed or threatened into compliance. We need more, she said. We need something he cannot cover up. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered it anyway. Meredith Cole, a woman's voice. Elderly, trembling. This is Eleanor Ashford. I need to speak with you. In person. Tonight. Meredith met Eleanor at a diner outside Gastonia, far from Charlotte, far from Preston's surveillance. The older woman was already there when Meredith arrived, sitting in a booth in the back, nursing a cup of coffee with shaking hands. Thank you for coming, Eleanor said. I know you have no reason to tutor me. You are right, I do not. Your son tried to kill me. Eleanor flinched but did not look away. I know. I have known what Preston is capable of for a long time. I just could not admit it to myself. Why are you here? Because I watched you in that courtroom. The way you looked at Vivian, the way she reached for you. You love her. Of course I love her. She is my daughter. My son does not love her. Eleanor's voice was bitter. She is a possession to him, a legacy piece, something to show off to investors and put in Christmas cards. He does not know how to love anyone. Then why did you let them take her from me? Because I was afraid. Of Preston. Of what he would do to me if I spoke up. I have spent 40 years being afraid of Ashford men. Meredith studied the older woman, the trembling hands, the haunted eyes, the way she kept glancing toward the door like she expected Preston to walk in at any moment. What do you want? Meredith asked. To help you. To tell you the truth about what happened to Corinne. Who is Corinne? Preston's first wife. Meredith felt the ground shift beneath her. First wife. Preston had told her he had never been married before. Another lie in a mountain of lies. What happened to her? Eleanor took a breath. Officially, she died in a car accident 12 years ago. Their son Bradley was in the car with her. He was 3 years old. And unofficially, Corinna is not dead. She is alive, in a private psychiatric facility in Vermont. She has been there for 12 years, heavily medicated, committed against her will. Bradley did die, but not in an accident. He fell down the stairs at our lake house. Preston was supposed to be watching him. Oh my God, Corinne tried to leave after Bradley died. She was going to take the insurance money, disappear, start over. Preston could not allow that. So he had her committed, forged the psychiatric evaluations, paid off the doctors, made her disappear. And you helped him. Eleanor's face crumpled. Yes, God forgive me. Yes. I helped cover it up. Well, I told myself it was for the family, for the Ashford name, but really, I was just afraid. Preston is his father all over again. Marcus Ashford was a monster, and I spent 30 years pretending he was not. Now my son is the same, and I made the same choice. Silence? Complicity? Why tell me now? Because I see you with Vivian. You are not going to give up. You are not going to let Preston win. And I am tired of being afraid, Intimona. Tired of watching women get destroyed by Ashford men. Can you prove any of this? I have documents, the commitment papers for Corinne, payment records to the facility, the original police report from Bradley's death, before it was altered. And I have this. She pulled a flash drive from her purse, slid it across the table. The dash cam footage, the original, before Preston's people corrupted the copy. Meredith's breath caught. How? Preston does not know I have it. He underestimates me. He always has. I am just his mother, harmless, decorative, but I have been watching, collecting, waiting for someone brave enough to use it. Why did you not come forward sooner? Because I thought I was protecting my family. I thought if I stayed quiet, everything would be fine. But it will never be fine. Preston will keep doing this until someone stops him. Meredith took the flash drive, felt the weight of it in her palm. Evidence, real evidence. Then Willa called. Meredith, her friend's voice was strained. Wrong. I need to tell you something. What is it? I am withdrawing from your case. What? Someone filed a bar complaint against me. They have a witness who says I relapsed, that I have been drinking on the job. It is not true, but they have documentation. Photos, A statement from my AA sponsor. Preston, Meredith said flatly, it has to be, but I cannot prove it. And if I do not withdraw, I will lose my license. Meredith, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. The line went dead. Meredith looked at Eleanor, at the flash drive in her hand, at the window where headlights were pulling into the parking lot. We need to move, Eleanor said. Now. Before Meredith could respond, her phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. CPS will be at your house in 1 hour. Anonymous tip about an unstable mother. Then another text. Court filing received. Emergency sole custody hearing tomorrow. Psychiatric commitment evaluation requested for Meredith Cole. 3 hits, one after another. Her lawyer compromised. CPS investigation. Commitment hearing. Preston was not waiting for the 30-day review. He was moving now, tonight, trying to end this before she could fight back. But he did not know about Eleanor. Did not know about the flash drive. I have an FBI contact, Meredith said. We go to him tonight. All of it. Everything you have. Eleanor nodded, her face pale but determined. They left the diner through the back door. Meredith did not look back. James Mitchell had been Meredith's colleague at the FBI field office before she left to marry Preston. They had worked financial crimes together, built cases against embezzlers and money launderers, developed a mutual respect that had survived even after Meredith walked away from her career. Now she sat in his home office, Eleanor beside her, spreading evidence across his desk like the pieces of a terrible puzzle. Let me make sure I understand, James said, his face grave. You are alleging that Preston Ashford murdered his mistress, kidnapped and illegally committed his first wife, and attempted to murder you, his current wife. Allegedly is the wrong word. Meredith said, I have proof. She handed him the flash drive. Eleanor handed him folders of documents, commitment papers, financial records, the original police report from Bradley's death. James reviewed everything. The dash cam footage showing the Range Rover, showing Meredith falling, showing Preston's face through the windshield, the payments to the Vermont psychiatric facility totaling over $2 million over 12 years, the forged psychiatric evaluations signed by a doctor on Ashford's payroll, the altered police report that changed Bradley's death from suspicious to accidental. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. This is enough, he said. Murder, kidnapping, false imprisonment, fraud, federal charges across multiple jurisdictions. How fast can you move? Meredith asked. The custody hearing is tomorrow morning. Preston will be there. If we arrest him beforehand, he might flee. If we wait until after, he might take Vivian and disappear. He is already planning to run. Eleanor said, he has fake passports, offshore accounts, an exit strategy. He told me months ago that if things ever got too complicated, he would just start over somewhere without extradition. James nodded slowly. Then we arrest him at the hearing, in public, on record, no escape. What about the local police? Meredith asked. Webb has been helpful, but Preston has people everywhere. This is a federal case. Local police will be informed at the last minute. We control the timing. And Eleanor, witness protection. James said, full immunity for her cooperation. She testifies, and we relocate her afterward. Eleanor exhaled. Relief and grief mingled on her face. I am turning in my own son. You are stopping a murderer, Meredith said. That is not betrayal. That is justice. They spent the rest of the night preparing. James assembled a team, coordinated with the U.S. Marshals, obtained warrants for Preston's arrest. Eleanor provided everything she had, answered every question, filled in gaps that Meredith had not even known existed. By dawn, they had a case. Airtight, devastating, the kind of case that ended with life sentences. Meredith looked at the files spread across the table, the evidence of Preston's crimes laid bare. She thought about Corinne, trapped in a facility for 12 years, her identity erased, her voice silenced. She thought about Dominique, killed to keep her quiet. She thought about Bradley, a 3-year-old boy who died because his father was careless or worse. And she thought about Vivian, her daughter, the next target in Preston's pattern of destruction. Not this time, she whispered. Not my daughter. James drove her home as the sun rose. The CPS investigation had been handled. The social workers informed that a federal case was pending. The psychiatric commitment hearing would proceed as scheduled, but with a very different outcome than Preston expected. Meredith showered, dressed, looked at herself in the mirror. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Thinner, harder, eyes that had seen too much, but also stronger, more determined than she had ever been. Preston thought he had won, thought he had crushed her, thought she would disappear like Corinne, another woman destroyed by an Ashford man. He was wrong. Chapter 8, word count 6 words. Running total 8,064 words. Status under target. Need to expand. The courthouse parking lot was crowded when Meredith arrived. Media vans lined the street. Reporters who had caught wind of the billionaire custody battle. They did not know what was about to happen. No one did except Meredith, James, and the team of federal agents positioned throughout the building. Willa was there, despite being forced off the case. She could not represent Meredith, but she could sit in the gallery. She could bear witness. "You ready?" Willa asked as they walked toward the entrance. "I have been ready since the moment he pushed me out of that car." "He did not push you. Dominique pushed you. He gave the order. He watched. He laughed. That makes him guilty." Inside, the courtroom was filling up. Preston's legal team occupied one table, 4 attorneys in expensive suits, binders stacked like fortifications. Preston himself sat at the center, navy suit, confident smile, the picture of wronged fatherhood. Judge Thornton entered. Everyone rose. The hearing began. Preston's lead attorney presented their case for emergency sole custody and psychiatric commitment. The same arguments, the same manufactured evidence, the same careful destruction of Meredith's credibility. "Mrs. Cole is clearly unstable." The attorney said, "She has made increasingly paranoid accusations against my client. She has lost her attorney due to professional misconduct. She is unfit to care for a child." Judge Thornton looked at Meredith. "Do you have representation?" "Mrs. Cole?" Meredith stood. "I am representing myself, Your Honor." Preston smirked. "This would be easy. I would like to present evidence." Meredith continued. "Evidence that was not available at the previous hearing." The judge hesitated, then nodded. "Proceed." Meredith walked to the front of the courtroom, plugged a flash drive into the display system, pressed play. The dashcam footage filled the screen. Clear, uncompromised. The Range Rover on Interstate 77. Preston's face through the windshield. Meredith's body tumbling onto the asphalt. The courtroom went silent. "What is this?" Judge Thornton demanded. "Evidence," Meredith said. "Evidence that Preston Ashford was driving the vehicle I was pushed from. Evidence that his alibi was manufactured." Preston's face went white. He leaned toward his attorneys, whispered urgently. "I also have documentation," Meredith continued, "proving that Preston Ashford's first wife, Corinne, is not dead, as he claimed, but alive and illegally committed to a psychiatric facility in Vermont for the past 12 years. I have financial records showing payments to that facility. I have the testimony of Eleanor Ashford, who will corroborate everything." The gallery erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Judge Thornton banged her gavel. "Order. Order in the court." "Your Honor," Preston's attorney said, "this is outrageous. This evidence was not disclosed. We need time to review." "I call Eleanor Ashford to the stand," Meredith said. The courtroom doors opened. Eleanor walked in, flanked by 2 U.S. Marshals. She looked at her son for a long moment, then looked away. Preston stood abruptly. "Mother, what are you doing?" "What I should have done years ago," Eleanor said, telling the truth. She took the stand, told everything. Corinne, Bradley, Dominique, the cover-ups, the lies, the decades of complicity. By the time she finished, Preston's attorneys had stopped objecting. There was nothing left to object to. Judge Thornton looked at Preston with undisguised horror. Then the FBI agents entered the courtroom. "Preston Ashford," James Mitchell said, "you are under arrest for the murder of Dominique Lawson, the kidnapping and false imprisonment of Corinne Ashford, and the attempted murder of Meredith Cole. You have the right to remain silent." Preston lunged across the table, reaching for Meredith. Marshals tackled him, forced him to the ground, cuffed his hands behind his back. "You cannot do this," Preston screamed. "Do you know who I am? Do you know what I can do to you? You are a murderer," Meredith said, her voice steady. "And you are going to prison." They dragged him out, still screaming, still threatening, but powerless now. Finally, completely powerless. Judge Thornton cleared her throat. In light of these developments, I am reversing my previous custody order. Full custody of Vivian Rose Cole is awarded to her mother, Meredith Cole, immediately. Meredith exhaled. Let her head fall forward. Let the tears come. She had won. She had actually won. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Meredith attended every day, sitting in the gallery, watching as the prosecution systematically dismantled everything Preston had built. The evidence was overwhelming. The dashcam footage, the financial records, Eleanor's testimony, the forensic analysis of Dominique's death proving she could not have injected herself. Corinne Ashford, brought from Vermont, finally able to tell her story after 12 years of silence. Preston's defense team tried everything, claimed the evidence was fabricated, claimed Eleanor was a bitter mother seeking revenge, claimed Corinne was mentally ill and her testimony unreliable. None of it worked. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, kidnapping, attempted murder, false imprisonment, fraud. The judge sentenced him to life without the possibility of parole. Meredith was in the gallery when the verdict was read. She watched Preston's face as the word guilty landed. Watched the disbelief, the rage, the fear. He looked at her, and for once there was no mask. Just a man who had finally been caught. She did not feel triumphant. She felt tired, empty, like she had been running a marathon and someone had suddenly told her she could stop. After the trial, life resumed, slowly, painfully. Meredith moved back to Charlotte with Vivian, not to the penthouse she had shared with Preston, which was seized as part of the federal case, but to a small house in a quiet neighborhood, 2 bedrooms, a yard with a swing set, neighbors who waved when she walked by. She went back to work. Not forensic accounting, but something related: victim advocacy, helping other women navigate the legal system after domestic abuse, teaching them what she had learned the hard way. Willa was cleared of the bar complaint after investigators traced the false evidence back to Preston's lawyers. She represented Meredith in the civil suit against the Ashford estate. The settlement was substantial, enough to ensure Vivian would never have to worry about money. Eleanor Ashford went into witness protection. A new name, a new city, a new life. She wrote to Meredith once, a letter that arrived without a return address. I know you cannot forgive me. She wrote, I cannot forgive myself. But I want you to know that I think about Vivian every day. I pray she grows up to be nothing like her father. I pray she grows up to be like you. Meredith did not respond. Some wounds were too deep for correspondence to heal. Corinne Ashford recovered, slowly, from 12 years of forced medication and isolation. She reunited with her family, started therapy, began rebuilding a life that had been stolen from her. She and Meredith spoke once, a brief conversation that left both of them in tears. Thank you, Corinne said, for not giving up, for fighting when everyone told you to stop. I did not have a choice. Meredith replied, I had Vivian. I had to fight for her. You had yourself, Corinne said. That was enough. That was our everything. 6 months passed. Vivian grew from a newborn into an infant, alert and curious. With her mother's dark hair and her own fierce spirit, she learned to smile, to laugh, to reach for things she wanted. She did not know about the trial, the verdict, the father who would spend the rest of his life in prison. She only knew that her mother was there, always there, but warm and present and safe. Meredith still had nightmares, still woke in the dark, heart pounding, convinced she was falling, still checked the locks 3 times before bed, still flinched when black Range Rovers passed on the highway. The trauma did not disappear. You did not survive something like this and come out unmarked, but you could learn to carry it, could learn to live alongside the pain instead of being consumed by it. She was learning. Chapter 9 word count, 685 words. Running total 9, 482 words. Status under target, need to expand. On a Saturday in April, Meredith drove to Interstate 77, mile marker 156, the spot where Vivian had been born. Someone had left flowers there. Strangers who had heard the story, who wanted to mark the place where something terrible had happened and something miraculous had emerged. There was a small cross, handmade, with Vivian's name painted on it. Not her death place, her birthplace. Meredith carried Vivian in her arms and stood on the shoulder of the highway, the same spot where she had lain bleeding 8 months ago. The same gravel, the same white line, the same endless ribbon of asphalt stretching toward the horizon. Cars passed. Drivers glanced at her, wondered what she was doing, kept going. They did not know this was sacred ground. They did not know what had happened here. Meredith did. She would never forget. This is where you were born, she told Vivian. The baby was awake, looking around with curious eyes, grabbing at Meredith's hair. Right here. Mile marker 156. Vivian babbled something incomprehensible and reached for a dandelion growing at the edge of the shoulder. It was the worst day of my life, Meredith continued, but also the best, because I met you, because I learned what I was capable of, because I found out how strong I could be. She crouched down, still holding Vivian, and touched the pavement, still warm from the sun, still solid and real. I'm going to tell you this story someday, she whispered, about how you were born, about what we survived, about the people who tried to destroy us and failed. Vivian grabbed her mother's nose and laughed. But not today. Today we just live. Today we just love each other. Today is enough. She stood, walked back to her car, buckled Vivian into her car seat. The baby kicked her legs and made happy sounds, completely content, completely safe. Meredith drove away from the highway, back towards Charlotte, back toward home. She did not look in the rearview mirror. The past was behind her. The future was ahead, and Vivian was beside her. That was all that mattered. 1 year later, Meredith stood in the backyard of her house, watching Vivian take her first steps. The baby, not really a baby anymore, tottered across the grass on unsteady legs, arms outstretched for balance. Her face was a study in concentration, tongue poking out, brow furrowed. She made it 3 steps before her legs gave out, and she sat down hard on her diaper-cushioned bottom. Meredith laughed, clapped her hands. Good job, sweet girl. You did it. Vivian looked up at her mother, grinning a grin full of brand-new teeth, and reached up to try again. They had settled into a rhythm, the two of them, mornings at the park, afternoons at Meredith's office, where Vivian played in a corner while her mother helped other women navigate the aftermath of abuse. Evenings at home, dinner and bath time and stories before bed. It was not the life Meredith had imagined, not the penthouse and the fancy cars and the society parties, but it was better, real, hers. Willa came by most weekends, bearing wine and takeout and stories from her work. She had started a pro bono practice specializing in domestic violence cases, using everything she had learned from Meredith's case to help others. You know what I realized? Willa said one evening as they sat on Meredith's back porch, watching the sunset. Preston did not just lose. He created the thing that will destroy others like him. What do you mean, you? Willa said. The work you do now, the women you help. Every case I take that started because of your advocacy. Every abuser who goes to prison because you taught someone how to build a case. Preston created his own worst enemy. Meredith thought about that, about the women who came to her office every week, scared and broken and convinced no one would believe them. About the ones who left with evidence folders and legal referrals and something that looked like hope. Maybe, she said. Or maybe those women created themselves. I just showed them it was possible. Same thing. Vivian was asleep and monitored by the baby camera on Meredith's phone. Safe, warm, growing into a person who would never know the fear her mother had carried, would never understand the weight of an Ashford name. Meredith had legally changed both their names. Cole, not Ashford. Her family, her legacy. Vivian Rose Cole, a fresh start. Preston was in a federal penitentiary in Colorado. Maximum security. No possibility of parole. He had tried to appeal, tried to claim prosecutorial misconduct, tried everything his remaining money could buy. None of it worked. He wrote to Meredith once, a letter that arrived 8 months after the trial. She did not open it. Gave it to James Mitchell, who added it to the case file and told her Preston was trying to manipulate her even from prison. Some people never change. James said, they just lose the power to hurt anyone else. Meredith believed him, but she also checked her locks 3 times every night, still flinched at black Range Rovers, still woke sometimes with the sensation of falling. The therapist said that was normal. Said trauma rewired the brain, created patterns that took years to unlearn. Said healing was not a destination, but a process, a daily choice to keep moving forward. Meredith was moving forward. Slowly, imperfectly, but forward. On Vivian's first birthday, Meredith threw a party. Nothing elaborate, just a few friends, a homemade cake, balloons in the backyard. Vivian did not understand what was happening, but she loved the attention, loved the frosting she managed to peer across her face, loved being the center of everyone's world. Make a wish, Willa said, holding the candlelit cake in front of Vivian. Meredith leaned close to her daughter, looked at the single candle flame. I wish, she whispered, that you grow up knowing you are loved, that you never doubt your strength, that you find people who see you for who you are and cherish every part, that you live a life so beautiful it makes everything we survived worth it. She helped Vivian blow out the candle. The baby clapped, delighted by the magic of flame becoming smoke. Everyone cheered. Cake was served. Presents were opened. Vivian fell asleep in Meredith's arms as the sun went down, exhausted and happy, and completely unaware of the miracle she represented. Later, after the guests had gone and the house was quiet, Meredith sat in the rocking chair she had bought for the nursery, Vivian warm against her chest. The room was dark except for a nightlight that cast soft shadows on the walls. I'm going to tell you the truth someday, Meredith murmured. About your father, about what happened, about how you were born on a highway because someone tried to kill us. Vivian stirred, made a small sound, settled back into sleep. But I am also going to tell you how strong you are, how strong we are, how we survived something that should have destroyed us and came out the other side. Not unscathed. We have scars, but alive, together, free. She kissed her daughter's forehead, breathed in the smell of baby shampoo and cake frosting and possibility. You are going to be amazing, Meredith whispered. You are going to do things I cannot even imagine, and I am going to be here, cheering you on, every single step. The house was quiet. The neighborhood was peaceful. Outside, stars were emerging in the darkening sky. Meredith Cole did not get a fairy tale ending. She got something better, something real, a life rebuilt from rubble, a daughter who would grow up knowing she was wanted, protected, loved, a future that belonged to her, not to any man who thought he could own it. Preston Ashford was in prison. Dominique Lawson was dead. Eleanor Ashford was somewhere far away, living with her choices. Corinne was healing, slowly, building a life she had thought was lost forever. And Meredith was here, in her house, with her daughter, moving forward. That was the ending. Not a sunset, not a happily ever after, just a woman and her child, facing tomorrow together. It was enough. It was everything. Meredith Cole did not get justice handed to her. She built it, piece by piece, document by document, witness by witness. She fought a system designed to protect men like Preston Ashford. And she won, not because she was lucky, not because someone swooped in to save her, but because she refused to stop, refused to let them silence her, refused to become another woman who disappeared. If this story moved you, if you saw yourself in Meredith's fight, I need you to do 3 things. Like this video, it tells me these stories matter, that real stories about real survival need to be heard. Subscribe to this channel. Every week, I bring you stories of people who refuse to be victims, who turn tragedy into triumph, who prove that the human spirit cannot be broken, and share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone fighting their own battle, someone who needs to know that survival is possible, that justice can win, that mothers are warriors, because monsters like Preston Ashford exist. They walk among us, wearing nice suits and charming smiles. They hide behind money and power and the belief that they are untouchable. They are not untouchable. They can be stopped. They can be exposed. They can be defeated. All it takes is one person brave enough to tell the truth. Be that person, and I will see you in the next story.